How can we make background jobs in ASP.NET Core? We have two ways. We can inherit from BackgroundService or we can inherit from IHostedLifeCycleService. In this video, we're going to see what is the difference between those two and also the new options that we can use in .NET 8 to start services in a concurrent manner. So let's see that. I will create a new project. It will be a new web API. Double click on here. I will put this name and next. I'll use .NET 8 and create. So there are several ways to create background jobs in .NET, but we're going to study two in this video: background services and IHostedLifeCycleService. The background service is recommended for when you have a background job that you want to execute repeatedly in the background. Think, for example, if you want to send an email every 5 minutes, for example, or you want to check the state of something in the database every 10 minutes or every hour, or something like that. For that, you can use a background service. Also, you have the IHostedLifeCycleService, which you can use when you want more control over the life cycle of a background job. Let's see an example of those two. Let's come here to the Solution Explorer, and I will create a new, here in the project, I will create a new folder. So add folder. I'll call it background jobs, and we are going to start first with the most simple one, which is a background service. So I'll call it recurrent job, and I will inherit from background service, and I must implement a method that is called execute async. This execute async is the one that is going to be executed throughout the lifetime of this service. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to have a while that we're going to execute as long as we don't get a cancellation request for this cancellation token. So let me say here, while negation stopping token dot is cancellation requested. So while this is not the case, while the cancellation has not been requested, then we want to repeatedly execute this block of code. So I'll just say here, console write line, and I'll say executing the background job. So with what frequency we want to execute this job? For that we can say, let me say here async, because I want to use the await operator, await, task, delay. For example, we can say time span from minutes. For example, every 5 minutes we can execute this job. We can do it every 10 minutes, or we can say once a day. We can say from days, once a day. But in our case, to keep things simple, I want to execute it once every 2 seconds. So I'll say from seconds to. And also I will pass the stopping token, the cancellation token, so that if we are going to start shutting down the application, then we throw an exception, and then we can handle gracefully the sunset of this method. So since I said that we're going to throw an exception, we're going to say try here. We're going to say try because maybe we want to execute some code just before we leave this execute async method. So we're going to say catch, and we're going to say operation cancel exception, and in here I can execute some code just before I leave this method. This can help me, for example, clean up resources or something like that. So here I will say stopping the background job. Alright, so how do I configure this service to be a background job? So let's come to the program class, and just below this add services to the container, I will say builder services add hosted service. We use the special add hosted service method to indicate that we have here a background job. So let me say here recurrent job, and that's it. With this we can press Ctrl F5 to execute my application. Alright, so let's take the console and let's put it here, and as you can see we have executing the background job here being written in the console repeatedly. And if I press Ctrl C to cancel the operation, to stop my web API from executing, we have stopping the background job. Excellent. So as I was mentioning, we use background service when we want to have a background job that is going to execute a task repeatedly. But what happens if we want to have more control over the life cycle of the execution of a background task? A background task that I want to execute only once, but I want to have more control. For example, I want to execute a piece of functionality just before that background job starts, but also while it's starting and after it has finished starting. Also, I want to execute some functionality just before, during, and after the stopping of that background job. For that, we can use IHostedLifeCycleService. Let's see an example of that. Let's come here. Let's come to the Solution Explorer, Background Jobs, right click, Add, Class, Lifecycle background job. And we're going to implement the interface, the new interface for .NET 8 IHostedLifeCycleService. Notice that we have IHostedLifeCycleService and IHostedService. What is the difference between those two? The main difference is that ILifeCycleService is a new service that we can use so that we have more control, even more control, more granular control over the lifecycle methods of a background job. Let's see that. If we come here, let's say IHostedLifeCycleService, let's press F12 and let's notice that IHostedLifeCycleService simply extends the functionality of IHostedService. If we go to IHostedService, we're going to see that we have here start async and stop async, which means that we have only two lifecycle methods here, start and stop. But as I was mentioning, what if I want to do something just before the service starts, or after the service or background job starts, or before it stops, or after it stops? So this new IHostedLifeCycleService allows us to have more granular control over that. So implement interface, and as we can see, we have here 6 methods. Now, it would be boring for you to see me typing all of this out, so I will just copy and paste some code. So as you can see, we have here starting async, 1 before starting the job. This 1 means that the order in which these methods are going to be executed. So we have 1, 2, 3, and so on. So we have initiating the job, job started, before shutting down the job, and job stopped. Alright, so now let's configure this new service so that it is configured as a background job. So let's come here, Builder Services add Hosted Service. As you can see, if we want to have multiple background jobs, we just have to configure them, register them using this add Hosted Service method here. So Ctrl F5 to execute our application. Let's bring this console over here. And as you can see, we have 1 before starting the job, executing the background job. So we have the 2 jobs executing concurrently. And also we have initiating the job, job started, and we don't have stopping the job because we haven't stopped the application. If I press Ctrl C, we're going to see that we have 4 before shutting down the job, 5 shutting down the job, and 6 job stop. So as you can see, indeed we have more control over the life cycle of the execution of our background job when we use IHostedLifeCycleService. Now, something that you may encounter developing background jobs is that if you have, for example here, an async task that does not return immediately, then your web API will not start receiving HTTP requests until this method is completed. Now, this is not an error because it could be the case that in this start async method, you prepare, for example, your database or something like that, and until that happens, you don't want to be receiving HTTP requests in your web API. That is fine. That is a realistic scenario, but maybe that is not your case. So let's see how to fix that. First, let me reproduce the issue. I want to come here, and because I made this async, I don't need this anymore. So what I will do is that I will say await task delay, and I will say, for example, that I need to execute something, and I'll say time span. Let's say that this job is going to last 10 seconds, for example. Alright, so let's see that if I press Ctrl F5 to execute my application, we're going to see that we have the console here and the background job is executing, but we still don't have the URL here, which means that our application is still not ready to receive HTTP requests. Now, after 10 seconds has passed, we have the URL here, which means that now the web server has started and therefore we're ready to receive HTTP requests. But again, that may not be something that you want to do. So what we're going to do to fix this is to come back to the program class, and I want to configure some new options that we have in .NET 8 so that we can start our services concurrently. And you may be wondering, okay, so we're going to start our hosted services concurrently, but what does that have to do with Kestrel, which is our web server? Well, it turns out that Kestrel is basically served as a background job also. So when we say that we want to start all of our jobs concurrently, we are also saying that we want to start the web server concurrently alongside our background jobs. In that way, when all of them start concurrently, even though our lifecycle background job has not finished starting, then we can still execute our web server. Let's see that. Let's come here and let's say configure, and I'll say host options. I want to configure some options, so options. Alright. And now let me say here, options.html services start concurrently, I want to start my services concurrently, I'll say yes or true. And also, if I want to, I can say services stop concurrently, and I can also say true. But now that we have this configuration, we're going to see that, semicolon, we're going to see that when I press Ctrl F5, Kestrel and my two background jobs are going to be started immediately. As you can see here, we have before starting the job, initiating the job, and also we have the URL here, which means that Kestrel is up. And now, after a few seconds, even though I have this here, is that the job has started. The lifecycle job has started, which means that with this configuration, I can start my services concurrently. I can have a method that is going to take its time in the lifecycle method, in the start method, to finish, and that does not mean that we're not going to be receiving HTTP requests in our web API. If you want to learn more about minimal APIs, buy my Udemy courses today. I have a course on minimal APIs with Entity Framework Core, and I also have a course on minimal APIs with Dapper using stored procedures. Link with a discount to all of my courses in the description of this video. Thank you.